They did a study over the past couple of years where they had people wear sleep masks, and they found that the group of people who wore those were better at memorizing information or kind of learning things and had faster reaction times. And I think that the reasoning behind that is because they were just blocking out so much more light using those. Studies have shown that sleep quality and just some of the benefits of sleep are amplified when you're giving yourselves that strong darkness signal during the nights.
Welcome to the Stacking Habits Podcast with your hosts, David, Matthew, and Caleb. Our mission each week is to dig into the habits, rituals, and routines of guests who are living life to the fullest. But remember, knowledge without action is worthless. So be sure to take what you hear and put it into practice. Turn these words into works in your own life. Without further ado, let's dive in. Well, welcome to episode 7. We're really excited to have Seth Davis from Sleepably with us. And in terms of habits, we've been talking about a handful of different things, from guardrails to the 5 gears to goal board. And Seth is going to present something on sleep. So he is I believe, a certified sleep coach. So we'll get into what that entails. But we're really excited to have him. I can't think of any habit that goes more upstream or has more of an impact on your entire day, whether you're trying to be the best version of yourself at work or home or to your family. And so, Seth, welcome to the show. Where does this episode find you?
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I am a sleep coach and I work one-on-one with people. I work with organizations, and so really just kind of promoting this natural thing that makes us all better, makes us feel better, makes us more energetic. And so I'm glad to be kind of peddling something that everybody can use and makes us better.
Fantastic. And I saw on your LinkedIn, you've got a wide variety of previous jobs. Looks like you did a lot of writing and copywriting.
Yeah. So, I actually started out as a journalist here in Denver, worked for a newspaper for a few years, and then transitioned into marketing and communications, writing and editing. And that's actually, for me, so I started out in sleep coaching because I had sleep issues myself for a long time. And a lot of them stemmed from that writing and editing work. So I had when I was a journalist, I had a kind of a weird schedule where I was, had late nights or just all over the place. I had deadline pressure, a lot of stress around it. And so that's really what kind of started my sleep issues. And so that was the beginning of my career, and it sort of led me to sleep issues and now led me to become a sleep coach.
Seth, I've had a few bad nights myself. Like 2 nights ago, we're going through this whole thing at work right now. But with all that stress compounding, I had the worst night of sleep that I've had in a long time a few nights ago. I went to bed at 11:30 and then woke up at 3 and I couldn't go back to sleep. But that, I didn't wake up and decide, all right, well, I'm going to tackle this, become a sleep coach. It must have taken a lot for you to make a big career pivot to go from copywriting, marketing to, all right, this is a matter that really is important to me. I'm going to, I'm guessing you had to go through some certification, some coursework, start a business. Tell me about like the experience that you were going through that was the catalyst that started all this.
Yeah. So kind of as you mentioned, it was over the course of a long period of time. So I graduated from college in 2000. So I started my career in 2005 as a journalist. And I had a little bit of sleep issues before that, but I became a sleep coach in 2016. So my sleep issues kind of spanned that whole period of time. 2018, sorry. So 12, 13, 14 years of sleep issues on and off. And so a lot of it was, for example, with the newspaper, I would have a deadline the next day. So I had to write this article or I had to lay out this page for the newspaper. And so I would have dreams about, okay, I have to, I have this problem to solve. How do I write this article? So I'd spend a lot of time awake at night or have problem solving dreams. And so that, started out just maybe 1 or 2 days a week, led into 3 or 4 days a week. And so going through that on and off over the course of 12 years, and not being able to, just having this stress in my life and just not knowing how to deal with these nights awake. So like you said, I'd be awake during the night, not sure what to do, tossing and turning, worrying about it during the day, trying to figure out how to solve this problem. So it really was just a long-standing issue that I just didn't know how I was going to deal with that. So I tried all the sleeping pills, sleep supplements, tried buying different products, and finally got to the point where I was like, I need to solve this. I need to solve this naturally. And so what am I going to do about it?
Was there a moment that sort of broke you where you just said, hey, I can't take it anymore, I have to do something? Or was it kind of a slow progression to get to that point?
I think it was a slow progression, and I think that there was just a number of days at work where I'm sitting there like I can't focus right now. I'm so tired, and even waking up in the morning and being like, I can't wait to just get back into bed and try this again. Like so when you're waking up in the morning and the first thing you're thinking about is going back to bed, that's not a good way to start out your days.
No, not at all. I had just a small period, probably about a year and a half, when I was going through divorce. I had a lot of just stress and anxiety, and that's really the only time I've had trouble sleeping. And I just assumed that was, normal. Unfortunately, it corrected itself. I never went down the path of supplements or trying too many things. Matthew, have you had any issues sleeping?
Not necessarily going to sleep and staying to sleep. I feel like I've always been fine. There's always times where I wake up and some days I feel very rested. Some days I do not feel like I got a good night's sleep at all, even though I didn't wake up a lot during the night. Granted, certain stage with kids have actually kept me up quite a bit throughout the night just because of the kids, which doesn't help at all. But more so than that, I figured out that there's certain nights where I just feel like I have way more energy throughout the day, and other nights, mornings, I wake up, and even though I felt like I was asleep all night, I'm just tired all day long. And so I know it has something to do with my sleep, but I'm not like one of those that wakes up and then can't get back to sleep. I could wake up as many times as I want, I can fall right back to sleep. It's just a matter of how good that sleep was that I was actually getting.
That's interesting. So, Seth, I track too many things. I've got a Whoop and I've got a Garmin, so I track my sleep. I know there's different mattress pads and whatnot too. Do you track your sleep?
So I did for a while, and then I just decided not to do it. I think that as a sleep coach, there's this fine line with technology where a lot of people are interested in optimizing things to the max and making sure that that we can use technology to track that and optimize it. But for a certain amount of people, they do start to get sort of either they go overboard with it, and they start to develop this kind of anxiety around it, and there's just too much data, and they're worried about what the device is telling them. And so for some people, I have to kind of slow it down and say, let's go based more on how you feel about your sleep, and let's put the Whoop or whatever in the drawer and just kind of go based on how you feel. So for myself, sometimes I'll track it just out of curiosity, just kind of say like, okay, where am I at this week? But for the most part, I don't. I do have I have a sleep score bedside device that I can use sometimes, or I have the Apple Watch. So I do it on occasion, but for the most part, I just go based more on how I feel.
Yeah, that's really fascinating because I've actually heard that from a number of people. I actually stopped wearing my Whoop for a while and then just brought it back because I've already paid for it for another few months, so it might as well. But I've actually heard that where, one, you have a little bit of paranoia knowing that it's being monitored. So it almost feels like somebody's watching you. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of that, which I've experienced, is some days I'll wake up and I feel great. I feel refreshed. I'm very energized. I don't feel like I need much coffee in the morning. And I'll look down and it gives me a very poor sleep score or an average sleep score. And I'm like, what the heck? And other days I'll wake up, maybe I drank the night before and I feel just terrible. And it'll say like I got 95%. I'm like, what's going on? So sometimes the numbers don't jive. And I'm learning, like you said, just to sort of be more in touch with my own body and just listen into what it's telling me.
Exactly. And that's a good point to make, is that they have done studies showing that people sometimes will give too much credence to what the device is telling them. So, you wake up, you feel great, but it says, whoa, my score was like a 70 or 65 or whatever. And so they'll believe that more over how they feel.
Yeah.
I think they actually did a study where they had people who were sleep, they brought them in and they had them sleep, and then they told them the wrong numbers. So maybe they actually got a 95 on there, but they were like, you actually got a 70. And the person was like, oh man, well, what's wrong? They started kind of worrying about it. So technology can be good for looking at trends and things, but we don't need, we take it with a grain of salt, I think is the point to make there.
I like that sort of an inner working of manifestation. If you slept poorly, but it said you slept great, and you're like, yeah, I feel amazing. Like you can almost trick yourself into just having the energy and being good.
Exactly.
All right. So sleep is a quite there's a lot of nuances related to it, and how much sleep should the average adult get, and what time, and what are some of the habits related to it. So I'm sure that we're going to sort of dig up a lot of habits related to sleep. But before we get into that, can you set any sort of base parameters in terms of, are there any commonly accepted length of sleep for adults, or certain things like that, just so we're on the same term as we define the term starting off?
Sure. Yeah. So the most commonly, so start out with the thing we see in the media the most often is 8 hours. We see 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, and that's sort of something that a lot of people become focused on. And if they're not getting 8 hours, they get worried about it. But so they've kind of one of the more commonly accepted things now is between 7 to 9 hours is sort of the healthy range for adults. So that's kind of what you might aim for. But a lot of people do fall outside of that. So I think they've done a large study showing that people around the world average more like 6.5 hours or closer to that. So and the people who are getting that amount and it fulfills their sleep needs are perfectly healthy. They're getting the amount they need to function for them. So I would say, 7 to 9 hours is sort of the widely accepted range, but some people fall a little bit outside that lower, a little bit higher, and that's okay if that's what your body is needing.
Seth, does geography play into length of sleep? Is there any research?
So off the top of my head, I feel like I've known, at least for people who, let's see, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers. I know they've done studies in different time zones, like in the United States. And so you have on the one end so in the same time zone, you have some people on the early end of that, some people on the late end, and they have shown that one of those groups was getting a little bit less sleep than the other end of the time zone. So even within that, and then around the world, there are places where they get exposed to more light or less light, especially the places where, the sun stays up for 6 months out of the year or whatever. So that plays a part in it. And then there are places where, they have more artificial light than other places. So it can depend on just the environmental circumstances, the time zones. And so, yes, so geography can play a part in sleep timing.
David, were you referring also to someone that lives closer to the equator? I think you mentioned that roughly, but
yeah. So yeah, for me, I'm thinking like people who live in Alaska, or just like generations of people who lived in like sort of the northern regions of the world, or I guess the southernmost regions of the globe, compared to the equator. I just wonder like if generations of patterns of maybe not even just sunlight, like some people maybe close to the equator, maybe they're more agricultural communities, and so they had to get up early before the sunrise. And and I guess that leads to a follow-up question, which is like, how much of sleep and sleep quality and behavior is genetic?
Yeah, so they have done studies. They have shown that genetics do play a part in it. You'll hear a lot of people say, my grandfather is a terrible sleeper, my mother is a terrible sleeper, I'm a terrible sleeper. And so there is a genetic component, and I think there may be some debate over how strong that is, how strong that can be. So yes, there is a genetic component, but a lot of it does come down to behavior too. So I think they've shown that behavior can influence sleep a lot. And even if you do have some genetic things that can negatively impact your sleep, you can somewhat make up for it with keeping better behaviors around it.
Yeah. How far back have we as a civilization been studying sleep? Like, do we have records from like the 17 or 1800s?
So I think the study of sleep is relatively newer, and just really diving deep. And I think they just discovered REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, in earlier in the 20th century. So it wasn't that long ago. And so I think that there are records of how people tended to sleep. For example, I think in around like the 14 and 1500s, they had what's called biphasic sleep, which you might have heard of, where people would sleep for a period of 4 hours or so, wake up, they would eat a little bit, talk with their neighbors, do a bunch of things, and then go back to sleep for another chunk of time. So we do have records that people did sleep differently during those periods than we do now. But I think the focused study of it is only relatively in the last century or so.
And in that last century, have we noticed any changes in sleep patterns or behaviors? Like even in the last 20 years, like smartphones didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that they have shown that that the amount of sleep that we get nowadays is less than people were getting before. Not necessarily by a huge amount, but we might be getting less sleep these days. And yeah, we do have. I mean, our technology has changed. We have more artificial lights, street lights. We have light devices that put out a lot of lights. So I don't. Yeah, I think I don't know some of the exact numbers about how it's changed since in that last century, but I do know that we have a lot more stresses in our lives. We have our schedules have changed. Our now we have remote work and all these things. So sometimes we don't have to get up as early as they did, like you said, for farming and things like that. So I think just life has changed, and so our sleep patterns are changing and things like that.
What's interesting to me is I know there's a lot of studies around chronotype and when you function best. So some people are going to sleep, a traditional 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. or whatever. Other people are going to sleep better. They're night owls. They're going to sleep 3, 4 a.m. through 10. Matthew likes to wake up, or he used to, around 4 in the morning and go for a hike and journal and do all kinds of crazy morning routines. So in relation to that, I know some people can't adjust their schedule, but one of the benefits of working remote is that in a lot of cases you're able to. Do you sort of work with clients and try to figure out what that is, and how can somebody sort of figure out when they are most, when they should be sleeping?
Yeah, and you're right. There is a genetic component a lot of times to that chronotype. So some of us are just kind of genetically wired to be the early morning type. Some of us are kind of the late night and then wake up later types. So that does have a definite genetic component. And so some of it is kind of looking at when do you feel at your best. So when does it feel best for you to go to sleep? When does it feel best for you to wake up? How does that fit with your job and with your family and lifestyle? And how can we sort of compromise enough to find this sweet spot where you can, be at your best, but also, perform well at your job and do all your obligations. So I definitely work with clients who are doing that. For example, I have a 17-year-old client right now who, his whole sleep schedule is different because he's a teenager. He needs more sleep, and he's just wired to go to sleep later and wake up later. So when you have to sort of square that away with having to wake up earlier for school and perform well at school and then have after school activities and all those things, it is kind of about compromise. It's about how can we change our routines, move our schedules around, make sure we're giving our bodies the right signals for quality sleep and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely personalized to each person's situation and their chronotype as well.
Yeah. So you had a 17-year-old that recognized they weren't sleeping well enough and called you, or did their parents sort of pull the trigger there?
Parents did, but he prompted it just because he had gotten to the point where he's like, I'm only sleeping a couple hours a night a lot of times. I'm like falling asleep at school. I'm not able to focus. And so he was at the point where he was like, I like to be a good student. I like to perform well, but I can't do that with the sleep that I'm getting right now.
Wow. That's incredibly self-aware for a 17-year-old.
Sometimes I underestimate teenagers, but when you actually talk to them, it's like, wow, there's some very smart kids out there.
So selfishly, I have a 12-year-old girl who prides herself on not sleeping. She brags that she doesn't need much sleep. She claims she can stay awake for 3 straight days, which I know is not really possible, and probably incredibly dangerous. So for someone like that, selfishly, how should I even think about the problem in terms of, do I let her just get to the end of her rope and then realize that she can't do it? Or is there something I can, get in front of it with studies or some kind of TikTok videos or something to kind of say, hey, sleep does matter? Because I preach that to her. I know it's important. And she hasn't accepted that as her own truth yet.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard when people, teenagers do it, adults do it, a lot of entrepreneurs and people do it, kind of wear that as a badge of honor, where I only need 4 hours of sleep or this or that, or I can pull an all-nighter, no problem. And so sometimes sometimes it's kind of hard to break through that. So I think sometimes a good thing to do is to look at the why behind it. So for example, if they're into sports or they're into, they're trying to do really well academically, or they, whatever it is they care about, kind of pointing out that you would be so much better at that if you were getting the amount of rest that you need. So, if it's sports, you can be faster. Your decision time can be quicker. Your reaction times can be quicker. You're less likely to be injured when you are getting enough sleep. So if you can kind of get to the point where just kind of showing them that when you're sleeping well, you're just a better version of yourself in whatever pursuit that is, that can be part of it. And then you can go to the scare them straight tactics. So you can start to look at, well, if you, and it's probably hard with a 12-year-old because they think they're going to live forever. They think that, they're just invincible. But just showing the long-term effects of sleep deprivation can include everything from you might get sick more often. It can expose you to some more serious, possibly diseases, cancer, diabetes, things like that. It makes it harder for you to control your weight. So it might gain weight more quickly. So if there are things that, and even, if they are into their looks, you can tell them, it's more likely to lead to, kind of bags under your eyes and wrinkles and all this other stuff too. So it's kind of just appealing to whatever is going to also have the negative consequences that might kind of scare them straight a little bit.
Yeah, that's some great tactics. It's interesting because all of us are entrepreneurs, and you are as well, obviously founding Sleepably, and I think our culture is making a good shift in terms of moving away from that hustle mentality and just I work all the time and I'm burning the candle at both ends. I know that Europe has placed a pretty good focus on work-life balance, where they're now working closer to 30 to 32 hours a week. I hope that trend comes to the US. It'd be interesting to see if some of the sleep trends follow that as well. Have you noticed different trends, kind of to David's original question, in different geographies and different countries in terms of how they value sleep?
Let's see. I think that I'm pretty U.S. centric in terms of what I've seen around sleep. But I have had people reach out to me on LinkedIn and things who, from other countries who are interested in sleep and who want to kind of bring that into their companies to kind of promote that culture of sleep. So I think that as far as I know, like there is that value they're placing on kind of the work-life balance, which I think is going to spread into sleep. And it may be already, but I haven't seen anything too specifically about that. But I just know, like on LinkedIn, I have some contacts internationally who deal with sleep, and they have been really active in promoting it to organizations and to people around there. So I think there's a growing movement, at least, that's happening right now.
Seth, do you think there will ever be a point in time where employers monitor employees' sleep and that becomes part of their performance metrics, like the quality of their, because I feel it too. I mean, we all feel it. Like when we're tired, we're less productive. Do you think there will ever be a reality now or in a dystopic future where everyone's forced to wear a Whoop and they're paid based on quality of sleep?
Well, I think that could be counterproductive in a way, because I think that brings it. There's a study that they did where I think they had a group of people and they divided them up, and they told one group of people, we'll pay you like $100 if you can fall asleep in 30 minutes. And the other people, they didn't incentivize like that. And the people who had the pressure on them, financial pressure to try to sleep, did worse at falling asleep. It took them longer. So I think that could be counterproductive if your compensation is based on your sleep. But I think there are some kind of at least pilot programs going on where, they have the insurance companies who they track how many steps you take and things like that. And they're also tracking sleep. And I think that people are possibly able to save on their insurance when they're getting, when they're giving themselves a certain amount of time to sleep, or I think there's some kind of sleep-based metrics that are factored into this kind of wellness insurance program.
That's intriguing, because that's sort of like I think State Farm or Allstate does it, where they put the tracker on your car or on your phone, and so when you're driving, they're monitoring sudden stops, your speed. I don't know all the metrics they measure, and it's optional. You can opt into it, and if you do and prove that you are a lower risk driver, then you can pay lower premiums. Of course, if you are a crazy driver and driving like a madman and going nuts, I think that's of course counterproductive. So just that thought kind of intrigues me. It's like, I wonder if there's a business to be built in that space, sort of an opt-in sleep performance.
Yeah, I think that maybe if you tracked metrics like, are they giving themselves enough opportunity to sleep? So not necessarily are you sleeping well, but are you giving yourself enough opportunity to sleep to fulfill your needs? And if they're doing at least that much, then I think that would be worthy of some recognition or incentivizing.
Yeah. A lot of what we've talked about so far seems to have this common thread of the mental game of sleep, right? And there's this whole psychology aspect to sleep. Would you agree with that, Seth?
100%. Yeah. So I work with a lot of people who I kind of divide them up. There's people who they sleep pretty well, but they want to optimize things and just for performance and how they feel and everything. And then there's a group of people who are not sleeping well, which is probably the larger group of people I work with. And so a lot of times with their issues, it's not so much in the sleep hygiene part of it. It's not, it's not that so much, but it's the mental part of it. So they have developed these worries about sleep. They're kind of anxious about sleep. They are not dealing with stress very well. So that's kind of leaking into their nights. And so it is part of kind of helping them to reframe thoughts about sleep and reduce anxieties about sleep and deal with stress better. So the mind is a huge driver of whether you're sleeping well or not. And so it's kind of helping to unravel some of those things we've built up that are making it harder to sleep in the mind.
What are some of the most difficult types of clients that you've had in the past where, I'm thinking like I'd personally be a difficult client, like me being stressed and stubborn, like I feel like that'd make for a difficult client. You'd probably make a lot of money off me because I'd use you for years. But is there like a type of client that you run across that it may strike you as like unusually difficult to sort of like get back on track to good sleep?
Yeah, I think, let's see, I think that there's a couple. So one of them that I found really hard to work with is people who are dealing with trauma in the past. So, they're probably working with a psychiatrist or psychologist already and working through those things. But that the trauma makes it harder to get through some of that, the sleep related negativity or their fears around sleep or things like that. So I found that people who are kind of processing trauma from the past are really hard to kind of get to the point where they're not worried about sleep anymore. They can kind of make it through the night. So they're kind of a hard group of people. And then sometimes the really stubborn people, sometimes I enjoy working with them, kind of breaking through those walls.
It's okay. You don't have to be nice, Seth.
David, you would never be his ideal client.
No, I mean, sometimes there's kind of this little push and pull where it's like, I really think we should do this. And there's some resistance like, oh, that's not going to work for me. Or I've tried that before or whatever. And so there's kind of this push and pull. And so I have to kind of navigate that. But there are some people who are just too stubborn. And a lot of people are just like, I just already know that's not going to work for me, or, I don't want to do that or whatever. And so I do, there's flexibility involved and people don't have to do everything that I recommend, but there has to be a certain level of, trust your sleep coach. And sometimes people are just too resistant to that. So I think those are two of the groups that are a little bit difficult to work with.
How about people who are dependent on supplements such as melatonin, and maybe they want to stop taking melatonin to go to sleep? Do you ever work with people like that? And what are some of the challenges that you face as people wean themselves off supplements?
Yeah, so there are a lot of those people. Some of them, some of it is melatonin, some of it's harder sleep medications, some of it is I had somebody who was on just kind of NyQuil or things like that, Benadryl. And so a lot of the challenges are are psychological, kind of in the mind. There are some physical. So when some people try to get off of these things, you do have a lot of times withdrawals. So it's hard. So you kind of get off of it for a few days, your sleep suffers, and then you come running back to it just to try to avoid that discomfort. So there is some physical parts of it, but a lot of people do start to find it as a crutch. So I'm taking this melatonin. I'm pretty sure it's not even doing anything for me at this point, but I'm afraid to let it go because I'm afraid that my sleep will do this. And so that's kind of what leads people to take these supplements for years, just because they're afraid of what's going to happen when they let them go. So part of it is building people's confidence up that, our body can handle sleep. It can handle helping us to fall asleep and to stay asleep. We don't need this thing. So we're going to work on those thoughts around sleep, kind of build up that confidence, make some adjustments so that we're giving our body the right signals. So it's kind of those two things at the same time, sort of building that confidence, making sure we're doing the right things biologically and making those adjustments and kind of doing everything in concert so that we can help them to gradually let go of that. And a lot of times it does involve just kind of a gradual approach rather than cold turkey. So we're kind of do this gradual approach and let it go a couple times a week, and then every other day, and so it's a kind of a gradual, tapered approach to letting go of them.
I just saw an article yesterday actually on the BBC, and it was talking about the increase. It was editorialized a bit, so it was talking about the shocking increase of kids under the age of 18 or 14, where their parents are giving them melatonin to sleep. And I think it's increased in this study, like nearly half the kids are getting melatonin to sleep. And then in some of the comments that I read, teachers were talking about, oh, we used to do like overnight, overnight stays at school or whatever, and they don't do that anymore because the number of students that couldn't fall asleep without melatonin was just shocking. What are your thoughts on, I guess, parents, or I guess we as a society, using these supplements on young children? And it kind of sounds like a leading question. I'm guessing you have a pretty strong stance on it, though.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern about it within the kind of sleep community, just because, and it goes for adults too. Like we're adults are using this stuff at very widespread use, and there's no real long-term studies over what the long-term use of melatonin is going to do to us, because it's a hormone. And so a lot of people, we see it in the drugstore, or we see it, we can grab it anywhere. And so we think it's just, it's safe, it's natural. But it is a hormone. And so there's no real long-term studies over what this is going to do to us. A lot of us are taking it at a lot higher levels than our body actually makes. So I think that our body actually produces naturally around 0.1 to 0.3 milligrams, so a very tiny amount. And so we're going to the drugstore and we're getting 1 milligram, 3, 5, 10 milligrams, so hundreds or thousands of times more than our body's actually producing, and just trying to kind of hammer ourselves to sleep with this, or doing that to our kids as well. So I think that if we can, focus more on sort of the behavioral aspects of it and the cognitive aspects of it, that's kind of the longer term solution than just feeding ourselves this hormone and just kind of expecting it to magically make us sleep better for a long time.
Seth, the last time I heard you speak, you were talking about a study that found that in those melatonin supplements too, like the advertised amount was often off drastically from the actual melatonin inside the supplement.
Yeah. So they looked at some bottles of ones that you can buy pretty widely available. I think they found that it was anywhere from like less, so negative 80%, all the way up to around 400% times more than was actually stated on the bottle. So we can't even really trust what the labels are telling us. So yeah, just another kind of thing to be wary about.
Interesting. When you have a new client come in and they tell you they're not sleeping well, they wake up, they're tired, is there like one thing you always go to with them to start off with first? Or is it different for every client? Do you like very first go to their nightly routine? Do you very first see how long they're sleeping? Is there like a system you go to right away or check off these few boxes before you start getting into the more detailed aspects of their sleep?
Yeah, so with every client, I like to get a good look at where they are right now. So I have sort of a general sleep intake form that looks at their routines, their stresses in their lives, their sort of sleep hygiene and sleep environment and all those things, just so I can see all the factors that are possibly influencing their sleep. And I have them track their sleep for a week, just with a sleep diary, just to see, when are they going to sleep, waking up during the night and things like that. So I use all that information to start to narrow in on what are their roadblocks for that specific person. And usually some of the first things I will check on are what's their sleep schedule look like, because that's a really important piece to dial in. Take a look at, if they are having awake periods, what are they doing during those times? So those are a couple of the big ones. Just those are some of the things that usually there's a lot of room to work around with those. Gotcha.
That makes sense. So normally one of those things you can kind of pick off on that intake form of this is probably the problem area to focus on with this specific client type thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll look at everything to see where I can pinpoint, but those things I mentioned are a couple of the ones that I'll look at first and be like, okay, let's see if I can identify any problems with those, because those are going to be pretty impactful.
So we are a podcast all about habits and tactics. So let's dive into some of the more specific tactics. I imagine there's two groups of people that are listening. There's one group that goes, yep, I think there's like 35% of people, according to the CDC, that don't get the recommended amount of sleep. So they probably have some sort of sleep deprivation. So there's probably one group of people that says, I hear you, I struggle with sleep, I'm not doing all that well, I need help. And there's probably another group that's like, I don't have any issues with sleep, this episode doesn't even matter. What are some of the tactics that you would say that maybe most people overlook or maybe are doing wrong that would either apply to everybody, if that's true, or to each of those individual groups?
Yeah, so I would say, kind of going back to the sleep schedule, since that's one of the things I look at first with a lot of people. There's a lot of mistakes that we can make within that. So, for example, you may have heard the advice to try to keep the same sleep schedule throughout the week, even on weekends as much as possible. And that's for a good reason, for just to keep our circadian rhythm, our internal clock just set. So it just knows the appropriate times for us to fall asleep and to wake up. So a lot of times we sort of mess with that by either just having a variable sleep schedule throughout the week, or we wake up at a certain time on the weekdays and then on the weekends we sleep in by 3 hours or something like that. So the first thing to do is just check in and see, are you keeping a consistent sleep schedule as often as possible? Kind of allowing for flexibility, but the better we do with that, the better we tend to sleep and feel. So I would say that's one of the first things to check in with yourself about.
That's a good one. Are there other like routines that you find are helpful, like putting screens away or spinning in a circle 5 times before laying down in bed? Are there any sort of practical things that again apply to most people?
Yeah, so I would say just kind of an overarching theme, because within this there's a lot of individuality, but I would say just make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to wind down before bed, because a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, but a lot of other people too, like to try to be productive right up until it's time to try to close your eyes for sleep. Whether that's doing chores, whether that's doing work or finances or whatever it is. And so when we do that, we're not fully ready for sleep. So it might be harder to fall asleep, or you might kind of struggle during the night because you didn't give yourself that time to disconnect from the day. So what you do during that hour or so before bed is sort of up to you. But I always kind of advise just calm and enjoyable things. So for you, that could be reading a book or doing some stretching, podcast, a hobby, talking to your spouse, whatever it is. But it's something that allows you to kind of let your mind rest and focus on kind of enjoyable and calm things. And I find that that's pretty universal, that we all benefit from giving ourselves that buffer zone between the day and the night, so that we can just kind of relax and just kind of fall into sleep rather than try to force it.
So an hour is kind of that magic window that's sort of the sweet spot.
That's kind of the sweet spot for a lot of people. That's enough time that we can just fully disconnect. Some people like to do more. Some people like to take it closer to 30 minutes if they're real, they don't want to give themselves that much time. But I would say an hour is kind of the recommended time.
Okay. How about in the morning, first thing when you wake up? I know some studies say go outside and look up at the sun, or not directly at the sun, but try and get vitamin D and sort of help with the circadian rhythms. Does the morning routine or some of the actions that you take first thing in the morning really kind of embellish what you've done while sleeping, or does most of that not matter?
No, I think it does matter. Especially the sunlight is a huge portion of it. Just, because when we get that morning sunlight fairly soon after we wake up, that does keep our internal clock set. It's just kind of a biological reminder that it's daytime, time to stop producing cortisol or melatonin, because we don't need that anymore. Start producing cortisol, because that does help us to become alert during the morning, and just kind of start that chain reaction of things that gets us alert and tells our body that's awake. So I think that's a really important piece of it. And it also just the morning routine kind of sets the tone for the day. So if you kind of, you press the snooze button and then you drag yourself out of bed and you're just not looking forward to the day, I think that kind of sets the tone for how things are going to go. Versus if you kind of wake up with intentionality and you wake up, you get some sunlight, tell your body you're awake, maybe get some physical movement, just get everything loosened up. Maybe have a breakfast that you are looking forward to, maybe a cup of coffee or matcha tea or something else that just whatever it is that you kind of look forward to, maybe a little podcast. I think that kind of makes it easier to wake up, and it kind of makes it easier to keep that routine in the morning. Versus, because I've talked to a lot of people who they are just kind of struggling every morning and the mood is low and they don't look forward to waking up. So I think if we can switch that around mentally and add things to our mornings that, kind of fulfill us, it does help to just make our routine something to look forward to.
Yeah, I love how you mentioned the podcast a couple of times. We'll sneak in Stacking Habits podcast right before every one of those mentions, just for some shameless plugs. If someone's in the other camp and says, "Hey, sleep is pretty good for me. It's not something I struggle with. I usually feel pretty rested. I've got a great morning routine. I've got my checklist of 87 things I do. I'm incredibly disciplined. I have lots of intention." Have you any of those clients that are trying to take it to the next level, or just make one little subtle shift? Is there one or two habits that you found that most people overlook in that camp?
Let's see. Yeah, usually when those types of people come to me, my first reaction is, it sounds like you're doing pretty well, like you do. But we can take a deeper look, and I can just look at my kind of go through my intake forms and just see if there are things I can identify that could be useful for you. But let's see. So I would have to look and just take a look at, when are you getting your sunlight during your days? When, your stress levels, are you dealing with that pretty well? And just get a look at everything that's going on. Just really see for that person what might kind of move the needle a little bit. I would say for those types of people, maybe just looking at, the comfort of the sleep environment. There's something we can do to make it just more comfortable, make sure that the kind of the environmental things are doing well. But off the top of my head, it is so individualized. It's hard for me to come up with something that's kind of universal for those people.
Let me ask this. Have you ever had a client come to you that you've gone through the entire intake form and just said, "I can't help you. You're already doing perfect and you should just keep doing what you're doing"?
No, because generally those people who are at that level aren't approaching me. They're usually pretty satisfied with things. So I haven't had anybody with that. But I have had people who have come to me because we do discovery calls where we just do like a free 30-minute discovery call to find out more about what's going on. And I have had some people who during that conversation, and I'm just like, you know what? It sounds like you're doing incredible. So just keep that up. If you do encounter any problems, let me know. But it sounds like you are operating at a high level. So just keep doing what you're doing. So I think verbally, I have had those conversations like that.
Yeah. Well, I imagine there's so many habits that are related to it, so many variables that I doubt anybody's fully mastered the art of sleeping.
No. And I think that too, part of it is some of the best sleepers, they just don't even think about it. Like it's just something that happens. They don't think about, I have to do this, have to do that. And it just happens. And so those are some of the best sleepers. And a lot of people who I work with are the people who have begun thinking about it a lot. And so it's kind of this fine line of, we have to improve things. So we have to think about it during this time, but the ultimate goal is to get you back to the point where you're not even thinking about it. It's just something that happens. So a lot of those people who, are the best sleepers, they're just, they don't even need anything because they're just letting it happen.
Does the mattress people sleep on have any impact on what you do? Do you ever go towards what mattress people are using?
Yeah, especially if there's pain issues, we might look at if the mattress is supporting them. If based on their sleeping position, if you're a back sleeper, side sleeper, might see if that's supporting you. In pillows too are a big part of it as well. So we'll take a look at the mattress, and then also just is the mattress supporting your temperature needs as well? Because some if you're a hot sleeper, some mattresses amplify your heat. So might be looking if there's a mattress that has kind of cooling properties or a cooling mattress pad or things like that. So yeah, I think looking at the comfort levels, pain levels, temperature, and seeing if the mattress is right for them or if we need to make an adjustment.
Have you ever tried yourself or had clients try the Sleep 8 mattress that changes the temperature? You can adjust to sleep warmer, sleep colder, has that pad that changes temperature. Have you ever used that yourself?
I've not used it myself, but I recommended it to people because I deal with a lot of hot sleepers and people who, they have different preferences than their partner. So a lot of them have the dual zone temperature controls. And so for the people who are hot sleepers, that being able to adjust the core body temperature through your mattress pad is a big win. And I've seen pretty much everybody who's tried those has had a lot of success with those.
I wonder how much sleep compatibility has to do with overall partner compatibility. Because I was going to say, Seth, if Sleepably doesn't end up working out, there might be a future in like a sleep dating app, matched to your ideal sleep partner.
I think there's a lot of potential in that, actually, because I think I want to say that the last number I saw was that at least 25% of people in the U.S. sleep in different rooms than their partners, just because there's just so there's incompatibility. One person's makes too much noise. One person likes it cold. The other person's like hot. Fight over bed covers. things like that. And so a lot of people just say, you know what, screw it. I am going to have my own sleep environment, and I'll see you in the morning.
How much are you running into sleep apnea issues? Because I know that's a really growing epidemic.
Yeah, I think that in the past there's just hasn't been a lot of awareness about it, so a lot more people are starting to seek out diagnosis for it, but it's very, very common. So see a lot of in men, not as much in women. Even some kids are dealing with sleep apnea now. So yeah, it's kind of a growing thing where a lot of people used to kind of dismiss it as, oh, I snore or whatever, and now it's realizing, going back to the why of it, that when you have sleep apnea, most of the time you don't have a lot of energy during the day. It affects your health. And so when you can get that taken care of, you just tend to be a better version of yourself.
How important have you found the light level in a room to be?
Yeah, so light levels are very important, and some people will tell you, "Oh, I like to sleep with some lights on or whatever." But I think studies have shown that universally, the darker the better at night, because even small levels of light can kind of leak through our eyelids while we're trying to sleep, and you might not notice it so much, but it could affect your sleep quality, make it a little bit harder to sleep. And so yeah, usually the darker the better. And they did a study over the past couple of years where they had people wear sleep masks, kind of the sleep eye masks during the night. And they found that the group of people who wore those were better at, I think, memorizing information or kind of learning things, and possibly had faster reaction times. And I think that the reasoning behind that is because they were just blocking out so much more light using those. So you don't necessarily have to have those, but I think studies have shown that sleep quality and just some of the benefits of sleep are amplified when you're giving yourselves that strong darkness signal during the night.
That's great. Well, as we do wind things down, I do have one last question as it relates to travel. So a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs and may travel for work or for fun, hopefully. I know that travel can definitely throw things off between waking up early. Kind of really the only time I struggle to sleep is when I know I have a really early flight and I've got to wake up on time, catch an Uber, drive to the airport. So do you just have a couple of general tips? Is melatonin something that can be considered when you are crossing time zones or going out of the country? What are just some of the generally accepted tips for travelers?
Yeah, so that is one of the cases when melatonin can be helpful. And so I always kind of give the disclaimer, it's good to check with your doctor, make sure that it's safe for you to take, and it's kind of that general disclaimer. But that is a time where if you are trying to adjust to a different time zone, then you can sort of use melatonin as to help your body sort of adjust to that. You're going to have this new sleep schedule. So that's definitely something that you can look into. And then some of the things we've talked about as well. So light exposure and kind of adjusting the timing of your light exposure is going to be useful for helping your body to adjust to your time schedule. Exercise or physical activity is another kind of signal we can use, adjusting your meal timing. So those are all cues that basically instruct our circadian rhythm or internal clock on the timing of things. And so if we're going to a new place, then if we adjust those things, that helps us to adjust more quickly generally.
So pragmatically, as it relates to changing time zones, let's say I'm going from East Coast to West Coast, so 3-hour time change. Should I be adjusting my daylight, my meals to adjust to the time zone I'm headed to? And if I'm doing that, do I need to do that 1 day in advance, 2 days, 3 days?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the length of your trip. So if it's only going to be a 1-day trip or 2-day trip, then usually it's not worth making that adjustment, because it's not even worth doing that. If it's going to be a longer trip, then you might want to just gradually do it. So just over the course of maybe 4 or 5 days, just change things by 15 minutes or so, just to get yourself closer to that time zone. So if you're going to be spending some time there, that can be helpful.
I like that a lot. Something I've struggled with, especially bouncing around for a couple day trips at a time. And usually you're trying to pack in as many client visits and, fun activities as possible. And you definitely feel that. So I'll be taking some notes there and trying to implement some of that. As we do leave the listeners, do you have a book or two that you'd recommend for people that do want to kind of study more about sleep and its impact?
Sure. So I think one of the ones that's gotten a lot of attention over the past few years is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. That is one. It gives such a great general overview of sleep, and the way he describes it's very poetic in a lot of ways. So if people are looking to get just a good understanding of why sleep is important and kind of what's happening with sleep, then I recommend that one. Let's see, another one that I really like. I'm just looking at my bookshelf here because I have a lot of sleep books over here. I really like one I really like is called The Power of When. By Michael J. Bruce, Dr. Michael J. Bruce. And that one really gets into the chronotype thing. And so it looks at, if you're a morning person or night person or in between, it takes a look at when is the best time for you to eat your meals or to take a test or all these things in your life. So I kind of just like that he goes so deeply into the timing of things. I think it's really interesting.
Excellent. Well, we will link to those books in the show notes at stackinghabits.com. And Seth, if anybody's listening and says, man, I really resonate with what you're saying and I need to kind of take some action, how can they contact you, reach out to you, and inquire more about sleep coaching?
Sure. So the easiest way would probably go to our website, which is Sleepably, that's sleepably.com. And they can just schedule a free discovery call. So just have a chat with myself, or we have pediatric sleep coaches as well if there are parents out there whose kids are struggling. So I'm always glad to have that conversation. And I'll mention too that we do things with corporations and organizations too. So if anybody out there wants to educate their employees about sleep and kind of help them to sleep better for the company's sake, then we do that as well.
Fantastic. Well, I may take you up on it with my 12-year-old if I can convince her that it matters.
That's the hard part.
Yeah. Well, Seth, thanks so much for your time. You're obviously well-researched. You quoted several studies throughout, and you've got a great podcast voice as well. So that may be something in your future, but we really appreciate you coming on, and have a great week ahead.
Thank you. You too.